Hello and welcome to another exciting tutorial. Today we're going to be jumping into Unreal and finishing out our VR scene. Let's do it. Okay, welcome back to another exciting episode. So today what we're going to be doing is going through the process of lighting our scene. So I'm going to talk about lights and how they work in Unreal and what we can do to create some cool lighting. And then we're going to talk about post-process volumes and how to get reflections working, which is a real trick when it comes to VR. So we're going to go into the nitty-gritty of what's happening. There's a few gotchas hiding out there that I want to just make you aware of. And then we're going to talk about the navigation mesh, how to get it set up so we can actually move around in our scene properly. And then we're going to wrap that up with just actually setting up our project for export. So how do we then get it out and export it? So we're going to be finishing the scene and finishing the whole project in this episode. This is the last one. I hope you've really enjoyed the series. So let's jump into the final points. All right, so let's talk about lighting. I'll show you the lights that I've put in the scene. Now, I've basically just kind of duplicated the lighting setup that we have in Blender. I've got one up kind of above the door here. I'll switch out of game mode so you can actually see. And then I've got down on the floor, I've got one down here. And I've just kind of positioned these roughly so I get the nicest effect with these lights. So I've got four lights down under the floor doing this red stuff. And then I've got one at the back, just like we have in Blender. And I'm just matching the placement of these lights. And then this one here, I've just put off to the side to brighten up this area because I felt it was a bit dark. And over here, I put this one over here to brighten up this area. Same kind of reason. Felt it was just a little dark. So with the side, when you select the light, we've got all the different settings. I've got it set to movable, and I've got my intensity is set to 9.4. You can change this to change the brightness and stuff. And I've got my light color set to a slight blue for this. Aesthetically, I thought that was nice, contrast to the red. And then my attenuation radius. This is basically like how far is it going to reach? Okay. So you could bring that right down and just affect a little corner. Now these are more detailed features than what you're getting. Some of these features are more detailed than what you have in Blender, and it helps you really paint with the light really nicely. So you could set attenuation radius there and go, okay, I just want to affect this area, and then you could change your source radius, which is like how big is this light, okay? And then you've got this other one, which is the source, the soft source radius. And this is how soft is the fall off, basically. So if I crank this down to 0, which is the standard, source rate is 0, and soft source is 0 is what the standard is. And let's say I brighten this right up. Sorry, not my attenuation rate. Let me brighten up the light. You can see it's really specky. Like you get this one big bright speck. If I increase the size of my light, make it really bigger, see how it's going to create this like big reflection and everything. And you get these like round circular reflection areas. That's pretty intense. And then if I was to bring that down, and then let's try the soft source radius, you'll see that the speck is going to kind of get spread out more and more until it's really soft. So it's just a way to like soften the light. The same effect as if this is a lamp on a film set, that's just straight up turned on. Then you put some diffusion in front of it. So some of that clear, that waxy white paper stuff that they put in front of lights in movies, or like a scrim with like a big, it's like a silk material, a big white silk material they put in front of the light, and boom, it's like this. It diffuses the light. So now it hits that and it scatters it. So that's a really great way to kind of soften up lights in areas. So I'll just put this back. So I've played with those settings for all these lights to kind of paint the light of this scene. And I think this looks really good. I like this a lot, especially up here behind this. I like the way it's backlighting. Now, with something we can do to speed things up, if you're previewing this and yours is going really slow, one little trick we can do is go to any of these lights that we think, okay, you know what, these lights don't need to be casting shadows in the scene. Now, we definitely want the ones under the ground to be casting shadows because we're getting these nice shadows here, but like these on the side, we probably don't need shadows from them. So what we can do is actually turn off cast shadows. And you can see the effect difference is pretty minor on these guys. So we can turn off cast shadows. And then let's see if there's any others we could do that with. Probably this one as well. And this one too, probably we don't need to cast shadows. Yeah, that's fine. So you can turn it off for a couple of these. And then with the ones that we have turned off for cast shadows, we can actually set them now to stationary. And what that's going to do is it's going to speed up things a lot. And by not casting shadows, we're not really going to worry about having messy light maps. It's not going to try and cache the lighting onto a light map with any of our objects. So I've turned off shadows for everything except for our 4 that are under the ground, because they're the ones that are really making the dramatic shadows for our scene, and that's really what matters. So they're set to movable. Everything else I've put to stationary. Now you'll notice if I just back out a little bit so we can see our scene. If I go to build, I'm going to go ahead and switch my lighting quality up to production because we're getting close to being done. And I'm going to click build lighting only. It's going to process, and you'll notice that things don't really change. So that still looks good. Hasn't screwed things up. We don't have any messy light maps or problems anywhere. So it's all looking pretty nice. So that gives us a little more headroom in terms of our frames per second and our rendering. So that's going to make things look a lot better. Now, the next thing to do is just to kind of set up some of the visual stuff for our scene, and then to get the ground plane working so that we can actually move around in VR with the controls that it gives us. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is actually introduce some looks to this. So in order to really kind of sculpt the visual appeal of the scene, we can do a couple of things. But the first thing is to grab a post-process volume. You can find that up here under visual effects, and you go to post-process volume. You can just drag this into your scene. I've gone ahead and put one in. In fact, I'll go ahead and just delete this one, and I'll bring in another one. And now post-process volume is going to change. You can override the base sort of graphics settings for your project, but only within the volume itself. So you could either scale this up so that it contained our entire scene, or you could just go unbound the volume. And I forget where it lives, but can't find something where you don't know where it lives. You can just type in the search details, the name of it, if you know the name. So yeah, there we go. So, and that's going to give us here infinite extent unbound. So basically it means that it's not bounded by the volume of this square, or this cube. So now I can actually drag it out of the scene so we don't see it, and it's still going to affect everything in the scene, okay? Now what we can do is add in a couple of cool things. We can override things like bloom, so I can turn on bloom here, and intensity and threshold, and I can drag the intensity way up, and now I'm going to get like this really bright bloom in my scene, which is going to look really pretty cool. I can drag this down. If you ever want to see what it looks like, the view is from your camera, you can just select your camera, and that will give you a little view screen. You can then pin it like this. And now if we move around to other things, go back to our post-process volume, it'll stay there. So we can just have a look at what it's looking like. So I might just drag that up to a value that looks nice. That's pretty good. If we go to our sequencer and actually go now to the end, when the door opens, you can see it creates this nice bloom as well for outside. So it looks really, really nice. Our green's not quite glowing enough yet, but I'm not worried about that just yet. I'm going to do some other things first. Okay, so yeah, bloom, that's a good one to mess with. We've got a lot of different things we can add into it. But I think bloom's the main one that I want to do. We could also do some color grading, so you can change the color values of your scene. You could just really add in a lot of cool stuff. Now, one thing that I want to show you is, okay, so again, I mentioned before, we don't have reflections. Why is that? Well, let's have a look. If we... Actually, right here, screen space reflections. There it is. There are several different types of reflections that you can use within Unreal. Okay, you've got ray tracing, which is very, very CPU intensive or GPU intensive and requires an RTX card. Probably in the future it won't. Others will be able to do ray traced reflections. But for VR, that's a bit too intense. So screen space reflections typically is turned off for VR. When we created our base template for VR, it's automatically turned off because screen space reflections can be a little bit weird in VR because they're going to be kind of different for each eye, and it's based on what the screen sees, but it still can be nice effects. So it's worth knowing how to turn it on. Okay, so if we go here and click on the type and switch to screen space, and we can go into intensity, quality, and max roughness. Now, you'll notice I've turned these on and nothing's changed. We're still not actually getting any reflections in our scene. This should do it. This should make it work. So what's going on? Well, this can be really confusing. The thing that's going on is when we created our project using this template, Unreal's actually created a little, basically a settings file that's saved that overrides everything in our scene, okay? And as long as that's active, we can't turn on screen space reflections, but we might want to override that so we could actually see them. So let me show you how to do that. Okay, so when I go to the project directory for my project, there's a little folder here called config. If I go into that, we've got a lot of different files, and these are pretty much just text files. They're INI files, which for configuration. If I go to the scalability one, if I click on it and I open with just something like Notepad, basic text editor, anything like that, you can see it's got a bunch of settings in here that are kind of pre-saved. And right here, SSR.quality is set to 0 for each of the effects quality levels, okay? And what we want to do is just change that to 1. So if I go 1 on each of these, just manually in the text editor, and then I save this file, close it out. There we go. Now it's not going to affect things here. Like I can't change this yet. You'll notice no difference. So what I need to do is I need to reopen the project. So I'm going to open project and I'm going to navigate back to our project. Make sure to save everything. Now if we come back into our project, you can see we've actually got reflections turned on. I'll try and find a spot where you can see it. Yeah, there we go. So there's some reflections. It's catching the light there. What's going on with this? Oh, we need to scale up. I forgot. We scaled everything else in our scene to 1.2, but not that. There we go. So now we've got these reflections working. I'm trying to see one here. It's a bit hard to see with some of it. So what I will do, we need to just adjust them a little bit. So let's go to our post-process volume and let's go back down to our reflections. So now you can see we've got control. If I fade off my intensity or bring it back on, we're getting reflections there. Quality basically changes how much, it's kind of like how much blurring we get. Max roughness here, we could drag this down, and if we get closer to 0, it's going to get rid of them. But the more we go to 1, the more visible they're going to be. So if I go all the way up to 1, now we're going to start seeing them everywhere. So like you can see here, we've got reflections. If I go to, well, the quality is bounded by our settings. So because we've got that setting in there, we're not seeing any change with the quality. All right, great. Let's go ahead and just kind of polish off a few more details. The other thing is the aliasing that we've got. If I go into settings, project settings, and type in alias, or just start typing in alias, you'll get it here. Default settings, anti-aliasing method is set to none. These are all different effects. Temporal AA looks really good, but doesn't work very well in VR. FXAA can work. There's different advantages to each of these. Again, it's kind of beyond the scope of this tutorial. I'm just going to stick it on FXAA for now, and that's just going to kind of smooth out things a little bit for us. And it's going to make it look a little bit nicer. Now, the next thing that I want to do is add in a little bit of atmospheric fog. I've already got that in here, so I'll just delete that so I can show you how it works. This is just another fun thing you can do. We can go to cinematic. No, what is it? It's in visual effects. And we want to go to atmospheric fog and just drag that into the scene. We'll just pop it down somewhere so it's out of the way. And what do you want to change first? You don't really see anything, but it's the start distance. If we drag down our start distance, it'll start to appear. If I bring it right down to like 100, then it's bringing it really. It's basically saying that we want that fog to start really soon. So this is usually used for like if you have landscape far away and you want it to fade off. But if we bring that down to 100, then you can use like the fog multiplier to dense it up. You can change the color of it. I'm going to keep this at 1 just to kind of add it like just a little bit, like it's a little bit of a subtle effect, but it's kind of nice. I think it looks cool. I think I want to add one more light right there at the entrance. So I'm just going to duplicate this one, Control W, drag it down and push it right into here just to kind of highlight the door a little bit. We had that in Blender, and I thought that was a nice touch. I'm going to drag the brightness down a bit, maybe. Bring the source radius down for it, and I'll bring the soft source up. Just a touch. I think that looks pretty good. This guy right here, if you notice, if I drag him over here, we're not getting any reflections for this hologram. And the reason for that is because translucent materials don't show up in screen space reflections. So in order to get that to work, we actually need to do something called a masked material. Now, a masked material is going to use dithering to create the material, the transparency, which can be a really gross look. But let me just show you what that looks like. So I'm going to take my holo table and I'm going to hit Control W. I'm going to zero it out. So now we have 2 on top of each other. And for this material, I want to go to my content browser. And let's see, if I click this, or if I click the magnifying glass, it's going to take me right to it. I'm going to duplicate this material. And it's going to call it hologram V3. And now on hologram 2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take hologram V3 and drag it on there, okay? And now I'm going to do the same for the red one. So I'm going to click on that and go duplicate and drag that onto V2, okay? Now I'm gonna open up hologram V3 and I need to change a few settings. I need to go to the main material node and I need to go over here to where it says translucent. I'm gonna switch that to masked, okay? Now it's a masked material, which is a different property behaviors, okay? And one of the things it uses, no longer uses opacity, but it uses this thing called opacity mask. Now, I could try and use this, and the only way to use this as we've got it in here is to, I have to use a node called the dither node. So if I just type in dither, it brings up tethered temporal AA. And what we have to do is then take that and stick it into there as alpha, and the result we pipe into the alpha of the opacity mask. So you can see it's not very great. It's this like dithered effect. So it's basically like creating this hashed look in order to create the effect that we're after. Now, we could leave it like this and click apply for our scene and then have a look at, how does that look when it's stacked on top of the other one. So basically we've got one that's, there for reflections and one that's there for everything else. So let's see that. We'll let it kind of load. It's going to compile. So, okay. So that's what it looks like, which, it's not terrible. And now we can see we're getting it in reflections here. If I was to drag this out, you can see it even more like around the door as well. We're getting all those nice reflections there. So that's one option. We could do that. The other thing that we could do is we could just forget this for this particular bit. And for our reflection one, I could break these links and just go over here and use the wireframe trick. There it is, wireframe. Just turn that on. And now it's going to use the wireframe to mask out the object, which will actually work a bit cleaner because it's not like an opacity mask. It's something that's applied to the material on a material level. But because we've made it a masked material, it's going to actually show up in these reflections still. So let's have a look at that. All right, there we go. So that's actually a bit of a better result. So I think I'll keep that. And I'll also go over to my red one and I'm going to set this to masked as well. Now, the problem with this, of course, is we need to have a solution for the fade, right? So what I can do is I can bring this in, okay? And I'll just show you if I take opacity mask and grab a constant and I set that constant to 0, you can see that it's gone. If I set it to 1, it's back on. However, if I switch it to something in between, so say 0.5, it's not going to fade between the two. It's actually all on or all off. So like you probably notice even more with like 0.1. So you can see even at like 0.3, it's completely off. So it's sort of either on or off if it's over 0.5 or under 0.5. So you don't want that because we want a slow fade. So this is where we would need to use that dithering effect. So we can grab this system here and I hit G to grab still in Blender mode. And we can type in dither, drop that there, plug that into the alpha, plug this into the opacity mask. And now we're going to get a result that will mask out on a dithered level for the animation data that we've got. Now we also have to remember to add them into the sequencer. So right now we just have our one holo table. So if I scrub through, you can see like one of them animating and the other's just sitting still. So the way to fix that is we need to go track, add actor, and we just need to go and get our second holo table. So holo table 2. And we also need to grab the animation for that. All right, so we're still getting a little bit of dithering, so it's not fully gone. So to get this to go from, instead of 0 to 1, we want it to be -1 to 1. We need to remap the range. So just like in Blender, we'd use the map range node to do something like that. We've got something very similar here. If we go remap value range is the one that can pop up. And so it's the same setup as Blender. So just like in Blender, we bring this in as our input value. And then we just need to tell it, okay, what are the ranges that you're dealing with? So the input low, so that means that the lowest it's ever going to go from the input side is going to be 0. And the input high, the highest it ever goes, we've set it to only go to 1. So make that 1. So now we're just instructing the node and we're telling it, okay, so this value can only ever be it's only ever going to be between 0 and 1. That's the range. Now we want to target it a little differently. So we want it to go to a target high of 1 because we never want it to go past 1. So we want to keep that. That's fine. But our new low, we're going to bring a new constant here and we're going to make this one -1. So now it's basically remapped it so that when it's at 0, it's actually going to be -1 and it's going to be scaled appropriately. This does mean it's going to fade off quicker than the other one, but that's all right. It's going to give us the effect we want. So we're going to take this result and plug it into here. All right, so we're going to be multiplying all this by 1. and that should work. We probably don't need to multiply by 1. We can just pump this in straight, but whatever. This is the setup we've got. It's fine. You can just keep it. So I'll apply that and close it out. All right, great. And you can see now it's working. If I scrub forward, you can see that dithering effect slowly fades out along with everything else. So now we can have the green showing up in our reflections, which is really good. We're going to see it over here, and it's just going to feel a lot more alive in the scene. So that's how we get that going. Okay, so now the last thing we need in order to get this thing to work in VR is we need to have a surface to stand on. So again, if remember we did in that first episode, we selected all the geometry in our scene, and we made it over in physics. We went to where it says mode and default. Wait, not mode. There we go, down here, collisions. Instead of block all, we can just go no collision. So now nothing is creating collisions in our scene. And then what we can do is we could select the floor, and we could make this our collision object. And that should work. Let's have a quick look at that. We'll go to, we want to view navigation, which is P is the hotkey for that. So if I switch on navigation, okay, so we're not going to see anything yet. We're going to get a green solid whenever we've got navigation, that or mesh that can be stood on. Basically, we can navigate across it. So that's because we don't have something called a nav mesh in our scene yet. So that's the last thing we need to get. So let's get a nav mesh. We'll just type in nav, and you can see here we've got a couple different options. We want a nav mesh bounds volume. So I can just drag that into the scene. Let's put it right at 0, 0, 0. And now what I can do is I can scale it down so it's not like a full, sorry, I'll scale it down like this. And now I'll put it back at 0. And I'm going to scale it up on the X and on the Y. Our floor isn't set yet to allow collisions. So if we switch from no collisions to block all, suddenly it's all going to turn green. And that's because now this mesh has a collision on it, and it's picking up that there's a nav mesh in the room, and that all works. So let's actually scale down our nav mesh a little bit so that we don't have any nav mesh outside of our space, because we don't want the viewer to be able to interact and get out there. So we'll just bring this up, and we'll scale these down. And then also too, as we get to the end of our sequence here, let's go ahead and get Mando and put him outside. And his control point's gonna be all the way back here at the door. So I'm just gonna, we gotta grab the background solid too. I'm just gonna grab both of these and just drag them out a bit and have a look at that. We might make him a little bit bigger even. Let's kind of fill the frame a bit more. We'll know best in VR whether or not that's working, but I think that looks like it should be pretty good. All right, now the only way to know for sure if we've got it all right is to test it. So let's test it. I'll put my VR headset on. Okay, so here we are inside the scene. And right away our animation's playing. We're a bit up in the sky, and the door's open, which is something we don't want. So, but let's have a look at everything. Yeah, it's all working really, really nicely. I'm gonna try and keep facing my microphone so you can actually hear my voice. The scale feels good, and the scene looks good. It looks really, really nice, actually. We can go right up to our door, and you can see all of our interactions are working. We can actually step through, which we probably don't want, so we don't want to turn collisions on for this thing. But overall, it looks really nice. And the reflections are working. You can see that when I tilt my head down, they start to disappear. And that's because they're screen space reflections, so they're dependent upon the screen space. But for our scene, this is going to be fine. So, yeah, nice. Sorry, I've got this hand like kind of floating in the space there. Just haven't picked up my other controller. Now, the reason why it started with the door open was because we had our timeline over here when we hit play to preview the scene. So if I go back to the beginning and preview it again, that door will be closed. But we could also do, just as a safety, is we could actually add in another version of this animation. But instead of allowing the whole thing to animate, we could just drag it like this and then right click on it. And I need to zoom in a bit. Zoom in, right click, properties, and make sure that when finished, keep state. So now what's going to happen is when I play this, now you may notice here, so it's always going to reset at the beginning of our playhead. And then when we get to the end, if you jump ahead, all right, so, okay, there we go, it's opening. Now, sometimes you'll have glitches where it won't animate, or you'll have something like, you'll do something like that, and then this one won't work anymore. All you got to do is just play or build or something, or save it and open it again. If you're ever seeing that and it doesn't make sense why it's not working, Don't try messing with anything too much. Just save it and restart, or just hit play to play the scene. And it's just a great way to just kind of reset the system. So anyways, that's all good. In VR, one of the greatest things is exploring the space. So when you first start up this program, we probably don't want to have the sequencer start playing right away. So it'd be probably good to build in a delay. We can do that with a blueprint, creating some code or whatever, and say, look, wait a certain number of seconds before you play. Or just the simple thing is to take our sequencer and to just drag out the length here to like, I don't know, I'll say 2000 maybe. And I'll just zoom right out and I'll grab my timeline here. So what we can do is we can just shift select each of our different bits and just drag boxes around them as well to grab it all. And then while holding down shift, we can just drag this whole lot out. And we just want to think about how long do we want it to wait. All right, so now I'm in the room and I've got a bit of time to explore, have a look around, see what I think of the space. Oh, there we go. Suddenly it appears. Oh, that's cool. And oh, there's the ball floating. Nice. All right, so the last step here for us is to think about sound effects and how to bring those into our scene, because it's really cool to have sound effects in a VR space. So this is the edit that I made for the EV export. So you can see I've got my music and my sound effects and all that stuff going on now. The animation is, these sound effects are timed perfect to this animation, right? So what we can do is actually use this edit that I've done, use these sound effect files, and bring them over as one file and cue them to play at the same time as our sequencer, our timeline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute my music. So this is what we've got. You can see. So it sounds pretty cool. And so there's a couple things missing, like a door sound effect or whatever, but we can hopefully mix all this in together with some music on the VR world as well, and it's going to feel really nice. So anyways, what we can do now is export just this, okay? And we want to think about, where does the animation start? So I've added a bit of extra frames here, you know, for dramatic effect to have the music cue and stuff, but I don't want that for this. I actually want this to start right when the animation starts. If I just go right to here, the beginning of this export, I know in After Effects, I pretty much exported it straight out, or out of Blender, I exported it straight out just from the very first render frame that we had. So that's where this begins. So I'm gonna hit I to create an endpoint, and I'm gonna go to the end here. So my last, sort of the end of my audio there, and I'll hit O to do an out point. I'm just gonna export this as a WAV file. Okay, so in Unreal, I've gone ahead and imported that WAV file. You could use MP3 as well. You don't have to use a WAV. So I've also brought in the music. So I've got this WAV file here. You can open up, you get all the different details and stuff for it, but I'm just going to close that out. And I want to go to my sequencer. And what I want to do is actually add in a new track. So I'm going to give me a little more room here so I can see. Under our tracks, I'm just going to click audio track, and in the audio, I can click plus, and I've got my two audios here. We can also attach directly onto an object like here. If we can go track and then audio, we can bring in one of these and set that straight in, and that's going to work as well. Just click track, and we're going to add the audio track back in, and I'm going to select here the music file, and I might just bring this right to, we'll see how early we can go with it. It's a pretty long music track, so might just go all the way down there. It's called Discovery, by the way, and it's by Dianova, which is on Artlist. Now, when it starts, we're actually gonna have this music track playing. Now, I might turn this audio down a bit. It's a bit intense, so turn that down to 0.5. And I might turn this down as well. So now we've got music playing, and we've got our sound effects for the scene. So it's all gonna really come together quite nicely. Okay, so doing it that way is really cool, but now the audio for the sound effects and stuff, they're not spatially oriented. So if I turn my head, it doesn't automatically track to the right of my head or whatever. So what I wanna do is actually set it in the scene. So if I drag my the actual sound effects into the scene as an object, it's now an actor in the scene. I've zeroed out its position and just kind of positioned it so it's right about there, it's good. And now in my sequencer, what I can do is, instead of attaching it to Holotable, I can delete that and delete that audio track from Holotable. I can actually go up to track and then add actor to sequence. and just navigate there to the audio actor. Okay, so now the actor is in the scene, all right? We can hit the track button and go to audio and attach the sound effects to it, which is a bit counterintuitive, but anyways, that's how it works. And then let's grab, and you want to make sure that the sound effects are lined up so they start to play at the same time as the animation. And then over here in the settings for our for the object in the scene, we want to make sure that we've got autoplay turned off, which is down here at the bottom, auto activate. Just make sure that's turned off because we want our sequencer to cue it. And then we go down to right here where it says allow spatialization. Make sure that's turned on. That's going to spatialize the audio. And then we're going to override the attenuation. And attenuation, if you go down here, attenuation distance, this gives you control over where the volume fades off to. So their inner radius is basically where you can hear it at full volume. And then the fall off distance is how far away do you get before it's completely, the volume's completely zero. So I might make the room itself, I'll just expand this out. So the fall off distance is just outside the room. And then I might bring this up so that it's kind of starts to fall off, as you get away from the table. So right about there should be kind of cool. I've also brought the volume back up to 1 on the music, and this one I'm going to keep at 1 as well because it just felt a little bit soft. I might even pump it a bit more because it's only going to be 1 when we're right up on it. So I might make this 1.5. The last thing is once our animation finishes, we want to have that same impact. So when the door opens, so I'll just zoom back out with everything, close down our things. And when the door opens right at the end here, you can see the door is not turned on. There we go. So when our door closes up, where is it? Animation. Here we go. All right. So right here where the door opens, we want to have that moment where we cut to black. Okay. Because we don't want to give away the fact that, he's not really there. And, it's just going to be really apparent to the viewer that it's a flat plane, unless we do the same effect we did in the animation. So basically we want to get this point where as soon as the door opens, so it's like right there, even on that audio cue where the music pumps up. The only trick in VR is you want to make sure that your viewer can actually see stuff. They might be looking in the wrong direction. So you got to be careful about stuff like this. But what we can do is just add in a fade to black. So if we go track and fade, and just make sure it's up at the top. I could put it actually, I don't think it fades audio. That's a good thing to test. I'm not sure. But anyways, with the fade track here, basically this 0 value, if you drag this up to 1, you can see we go to black. So what we can do is set a keyframe right here. So add a little keyframe and then go forward maybe 10 frames, maybe. And I'll drag this up to 1 and set another keyframe. So yeah, maybe even a bit quicker. Drag that in, shift select both of these guys. With shift selecting, you got to keep holding down shift to drag them. It's kind of nice actually on that audio cue. Yeah, we'll just keep it like that. And then you could fade up a title or something, or put in some geometry that was the title. That could be really cool as well. But that would be a good point to then end the scene. Okay, and the last thing I want to do here is just do a little fade off. Right there. That's a good point actually to kind of end the music. So we could just cue up a little fade. So I can just click on here for volume, add a keyframe, and then go back to here. And add another keyframe and then go back to that one that we just made and drop this to 0 and just test that. And then what we can do is we can actually end our project there. So drag that end right over. So that way the whole timeline just stops at that point. Okay, great. So let's test it out. that's how we can get all this stuff to work in VR. Now, of course, the final thing you got to do is get this thing out of Unreal and into some form that you can actually use. And thankfully, that's relatively simple. All we're going to do first is just go up to our settings, go into your project settings. There's a couple things you just want to make sure are set up right. If you type in map, you want to make sure the game default map is set to Bounty Hunter's Den, okay? Just like our editor startup. That way the game will default into this and begin playing. So we can just close that out. Actually, and then in settings, project settings, you want to think about what's your delivery. So what are you exporting out to? So in my case, I'm setting up this project. I'm going to package my project. I want to do it for Windows. Okay, so under supported platforms in your settings, you can take all the different platforms you want to support. So I'm supporting Windows, and so I've just got that ticked. All right, so one other thing we need to do is just type in build here in our project settings. And it's going to bring up the project packaging settings. And right here we have build configuration. So the build configuration is basically what stage are you at? So are we debugging, are we developing, we're testing, are we shipping? The difference between these is it's basically how it compiles the final project when it exports it. And these basically include different levels of debugging information that you can access to help you figure out problems. But that naturally makes your program just a little bit slower, and it also makes it a bit bigger, and just because it's implementing all this debug functionality. But you don't need that when you're done and you're just doing your final shipping build. So when we're all done, we need to switch this to shipping, and basically that's going to now no longer include all of the different debugging elements that it would normally put in there. So it's going to run a bit more efficiently, and it's going to be a bit smaller of a file size. So you can also set your build target. Basically, where do you want, how do you want to name the target file? You can leave that blank as well. It'll put a default name in there for you for now. Full rebuild if you want to do a full rebuild when you do the export. And that's pretty much it. So we can close that out. And I'm going to go up to File and Package Project, and then Windows. And I want to go whatever platform I'm targeting. So am I going to do just 32-bit platforms or 64-bit? I'm going to go ahead and do 64-bit. And you get this little pop-up here, packaging project for Windows. And now we just have to wait for it to complete. And it takes just a few minutes, and it'll compile everything and go through it. And there we go. It says packaging complete. So we're all good. And it says success, so it's saved it out. What we end up with is a file here called Windows No Editor. That's because we actually haven't given the file a name. And here it is. Bounty Hunter Den V2 exe, or whatever it is you've named it. And you can literally just double click this project file and it'll start up and run for you in VR, which is very, very cool. Now, if you did want to actually, kind of change some of the settings here. So if you select the different platform like Windows, for example, down here, you get all these things here, and you can actually change, what's the editor splash look like? What does the game splash look like? What does the game icon look like? So you can make your own icon and put that there, and set all that up so that it's exactly the way you want it. And thanks so much for watching. Again, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed this series. I really enjoyed taking you through it. I hope you've gotten a lot out of it and that you've had a good time through the journey. It's been really fun. I hope your scene turns out really well. And I hope you're equipped now to make some really great VR using Blender. I think it's a great tool for making elements and scenes for VR and animation as well. And just really excited to see it working well with Unreal. Now, stay tuned to Unreal's own website. They actually are putting out a lot of new things really every week. There's new stuff coming out right now for really trying to get Blender and Unreal to work better and better together. So a lot of the stuff that we've gone over in this tutorial, they've already released some stuff like while this tutorial series is going out that simplify a few of the processes and help streamline things even more. So check out on their website. Make sure you stay tuned to what they're doing and stay abreast, because it's just going to keep getting easier and easier to work between these two programs. It's a really exciting time. So thanks again for watching this series. Please hit that like button if you enjoyed the series. And if you want to see more VR tutorials, please put it in the comments, like it, subscribe it, so I can see a lot of people engaged. The only way I know is if you respond to it. So please respond if you're keen for more. And thanks so much. Please ring the bell if you want to get notifications when the next episode drops. And I will catch you in the next series. And have a great week. I'll see you later. Bye.